Welcome back to the Thrive Now podcast. These are conversations where I sit down with thinkers, builders, and deep feelers to explore what it actually looks like to thrive, not just perform in your life, in your career. Today, we're talking about comparison. We hear all the time that comparison is the thief of joy, but what if that's only half the story? What if comparison, when used intentionally, can actually become a tool for growth, clarity, and confidence? I'm joined by LaPora Lindsey, a learning and development manager, workshop facilitator, and longtime military spouse whose career has spanned multiple industries, roles, and seasons of reinvention. Together, we unpack how comparison shows up in our professional lives, how to tell the difference between healthy and toxic comparison, and how to reclaim your voice, value, and direction when you feel behind or overlooked. Now, before we dive into this conversation, I do want you to keep this reflection prompt in mind. Where in your life are you comparing outcomes without seeing the full process, support system, or sacrifices behind them? What would change if you approached comparison as curiosity instead of judgment? All right, keep that in mind, and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back. Today we are talking about comparison. I know we always hear comparison is the thief of joy, but what if we flip that? So that is what our conversation will be about today. And I will kick it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about this topic of comparison. Why is this something that's been spinning in your mind recently?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Deja. I really appreciate it. Glad to be here. So a little bit about myself. I am a military spouse, and I've been a military spouse for almost 17 years. And during that time, I've worked at 10 different companies. And for the longest time, I saw that as a disadvantage. I look like a job hopper. I can't keep a steady position. But then over time, I started to recognize that this was actually a great opportunity for me to notice what things work in different workplaces, industries, and what things don't work. And so now I take all of that and I go into different organizations and events and provide workshops and keynotes on how each individual plays a role to improve the workplace. And I also have a 9-to-5 as well as a learning and development manager. As far as how I came to this whole idea about comparison, it's still relatively new. 2021, I had just started the focus that I have now, which is doing workshops and trainings. And I had just released my book at that time. And I was talking to a lot of people trying to get insights. Okay, so what business models work? What different processes are going to be the best way to get things done? And then I started to recognize that the things that they were telling me was for a different demographic. So I was their demographic, but the demographic that I was aiming for was different. I also started to recognize that some of the things that they were recommending wasn't necessarily working for me. And I started having conversations with people, realizing that what I saw on social media or what they were presenting wasn't the whole story. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know exactly when that moment was, but something just hit me and I was like, wait a minute. What I'm doing is I'm actually comparing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that was kind of when everything just kind of hit.
I'm glad that you mentioned all the different hats that you wore, because I think we all do, and we all struggle with thinking that we'll be looked at as a job hopper or someone who can't stay still.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that too. Like I just say I'm a busybody now, and then I let people do whatever they do with that. But for you, how do you normally stay anchored in your identity when you're going from role to role? And how has comparisons played a part when you were wearing all those different hats?
Yes. So as far as staying anchored, I have to admit that I have not always been anchored. There's a couple times when the anchor is still moving. When I strip away the title, when I strip away all of those things. What are the attributes that I have that I like about myself in ways that I contribute to the conversation or I contribute to the workplace? A large part of that is because whenever I have been unemployed in the past, it was, okay, so now what do I do? Now what am I supposed to do? But if I get down to the root and I remember my values and I remember what I represent, then it makes it a whole lot easier. As far as how comparison plays into that, I'm not quite sure it does, not in this particular sense. I use comparison more so for professional growth and development. And so maybe in that sense of what are other people doing who are not employed at the time, or what are some things that people have done in the past? Because when we look at comparison, a lot of times we look at it as, what are the similarities and how can I have that same similarity versus also what are the differences? And do I want that difference and how can I get there?
You mentioned values. How were you able to figure out what your values were, especially going from job to job?
Yeah.
And then sitting in those values when you were unemployed?
So I actually think it was easier to know what my values were as I was going from job to job every 2 to 3 years. And that was because if I wasn't getting my needs met, transparency being one of the things that I value, communication, relationship building, those are the types of things that I value. If those needs weren't being met, then there was always like this feeling, and I would have to be like, why do I feel like this? Why am I not, enjoying my time here as I did in previous jobs? And so that made it a little bit more evident for me what my values were. But for people who don't have that opportunity, then really honestly just sitting down and thinking about, what do you enjoy in the workplace? Because your values in the workplace may be slightly different than in your personal life. But if you're focusing on the workplace and focusing in on your career, what are things that you look forward to? What are things that if this is happening, not just on your side, but from other people that you work with, you're just like, yes, this is a great place to be. Aside from just the salary, what else are you looking for?
Yeah, that makes sense. We spend so much time at work and then we just go. We're glad we got this opportunity, so we just show up every day. But I'm really big on career design and workplace design and making sure that the place that you choose, you're choosing it back. So I love that you said that people just have to sit with themselves. I think that brings us to the topic of authenticity too. We hear that word a lot, but I don't know if people know what the meaning is because it just gets thrown around. But what does that normally look like in a professional setting, and how can people actually practice authenticity, especially when relating back to things like their values in the workplace?
So, I think a part of that, Deja, is that a lot of times people have to understand that authenticity is not saying everything that's on your mind. It is not being all of you all at once in one place. That is not authenticity. Authenticity is, number one, knowing what your values are, and then being true to them. So ensuring that your actions and your values are aligned. That is being authentic. I'll use this as a personal example. So I am someone who is very reserved and more observant when I don't know you. And it doesn't matter if it's in the workplace or if it's outside of the workplace. You will not get the same version of LaPora that my kids get, right? That people who have known me for years get. It's different. And the reason for that is because I need to be sure that there is trust there on both ends. And that is authentic to me. And so my actions align with that, where I'm very reserved, very observant, just going to take a step back and see what's going on, see if I feel comfortable. And then I will be a little bit more open. And I think that that's important to have that in the workplace is knowing that you don't have to be all of you all at once, because we come in layers, and no matter how you turn it, we won't be the exact same person that we are around our loved ones as we are around someone that we just met. And some people are, but most of the time that is defined by other people as that's a lot, because there's so much of us. We are so complex. We're not just loud or quiet. We're not just energetic and low energy. There are so many more layers to that. And so just ensuring that it's those values that align with our actions, that's how we can be authentic in the workplace.
And I'm going to go a little bit deeper now in talking about people feeling like they have value. I believe everyone is uniquely valuable.
Yes.
But we may not always see the uniqueness or the value that we bring to certain spaces, especially professional spaces. So how do you normally guide professionals in workshops or conversations that you might be having to help them sort of bring out that uniqueness or see it for themselves?
Yeah. So I focus on not necessarily the uniqueness portion, only because there's this idea. I haven't explored it, but
Yes.
somebody said, I don't even know who the person is, but somebody really did say this. They said that if everyone is unique, then no one is.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know who said it, but I guarantee if you Google it, that person will pop up. And so I try to guide people into exploring what attributes they have contributes to the overall team's goals or accomplishments, and what is the part that they play in that. So the first thing is identifying 5 attributes that you have about yourself. They cannot be physical, and it can't be tied to an outcome or a result. It has to be an attribute that contributed to that. So for instance, if critical thinking or being creative, and then they have to prioritize them. And the priority is based on which ones they really enjoy the most. And then they have to write out for each of those how they utilize that attribute in the workplace, or how they utilized it to help someone or to contribute to an end goal. And I have found that that is helpful because now that's not tied to a position. Now that's not tied to anything that we can't control, but it's tied to what are we actively choosing to be intentional about and how we are able to contribute to the goals, whether it's for the team, the department, or the organization.
I like that. I may have to take that into some sessions with some folks. I like career journaling. I put that in the category of career journaling, trying to make sense and be reflective of where you've been and where you're going. So I love that so much. All right, now we're going to get down to the nitty gritty. I opened it up with saying comparison is often seen as the thief of joy. Do you have a specific moment in your life when comparison actually helped you grow rather than holding you back?
Yes. I would say over the last 4 years, when it first came to me that I should look at comparison a little bit different, it has been helping me grow. And the reason for that is because typically when we look at comparison, we look at it on a surface level. And I think that social media has given us the illusion that, oh no, this is not just surface level. I know what's going on because I see posts about what's behind the scenes. Even the behind the scenes posts don't tell you everything. But essentially, it has helped me because there were a couple of projects. Actually, one thing in particular that I was trying to do was I was trying to figure out, okay, so what are potential lead magnets that I can do? And there was this consensus of this doesn't work. I was getting that from a lot of different people. But then when I started to compare, as in I started to look a little bit closer at who was saying that and what they were doing and what their turnaround was, I was like, well, your demographic is different than what I'm aiming for. We're not going for the same thing. And so then I started to look at people who were more closely aligned on the surface of what I was aiming for. I started asking them questions. I started researching. I started looking for potential outcomes. And what I realized is that if I approach comparison from the mindset of I'm a researcher, I'm just trying to get the information and the detail, that is how I can go forward, because now I'm getting bits and pieces of this is what this person is doing. I don't want to do that. I don't want to, maybe there's the time I don't want to invest. Maybe there's the sacrifice I don't want to invest. But this person over here, that looks like a pretty decent pathway. I like the amount of time that they're spending on this. How about I try this? And so I look at all of these different people. I'm looking at the process that they're taking. I am asking them questions when I'm given the opportunity to, and I'm saying, this is what I want to utilize for myself, or this is something that isn't going to work. But the only reason I'm able to determine any of that is because I am comparing. I think that when we look at comparison, we look at that's the end result that I want. And so we forget that what we're actually looking at is a small piece of someone's journey while they're in the process. We're not looking at the end outcome. We're looking at a small piece. Think about a Rubik's Cube. A Rubik's Cube has 6 sides. We can see one side and it looks like it's completely done. And we're just like, yes, that's what I want. What we don't recognize is that for a Rubik's Cube, you solve one side, but then you have to technically unsolve it, move things around in order to solve all sides. And that's how comparison is. We see one thing, but there's actually so many things that are going on before it's actually that final result. Something that very few of us actually see except for the person themselves.
Yep, that makes sense. I'll raise my hand and say, I don't show all the things that I'm doing, all the moving pieces, all the messages I have to send, all the nights I have to stay up to do certain things. Like, people just see what they think is the end result, like you mentioned. So what you described as healthy comparison, what are some signs of unhealthy or toxic comparison that you might have experienced or you've seen other people experience? I just want to make sure that people understand the difference. Yeah.
Social comparison originally was introduced by Leon Festinger back in 1954, where there's like the upward and the downward cycle of comparison, where we can look at someone and we can say, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. How can I get to a point of being able to improve my skills to get to that point? And then there's also this, gosh, they're just doing so great in everything that she's doing. Like, how I can never get there. Yeah. And so it brings us down. So essentially, it's when self-doubt comes in. It's when we feel threatened, jealousy, essentially, where we're feeling like if this person succeeds, I can't succeed. That's more of that jealousy take on it. And so that, honestly, the whole premise of healthy comparison versus toxic, it comes down to awareness. When we initially feel that feeling, being curious of what am I feeling here? Am I admiring this person? Am I feeling like this person, if they succeed, I will somehow fail? Why am I feeling that way? So being able to truly ask ourselves that question. Now, if we're feeling like there's no possible way for us to get past the fact that this person is doing some amazing things and that makes us doubt ourselves, then perhaps that's not the person that we need to compare to, because we haven't yet reached that point. But if we get to a point where we're just like, wow, the reason why I'm curious about and I'm trying to compare myself with this person is because I think that there are some steps that I can take in order to not necessarily get me to that point, but to help me to grow to a point that's similar to that person. So really asking ourselves those questions, I think, is huge, but awareness has to happen first. We have to explore how we're feeling about who we're trying to compare ourselves to before we start asking ourselves those questions.
And I saw a phrase called productive envy, and I feel like you were digging into that a little bit. I don't want to label anything as envy, but like being productive with your energy when you realize that there might be a tinge of jealousy. I saw someone post on LinkedIn that it's okay to also unfollow people. Like, if you realize that they're doing really well in a space that you're interested in and it's not motivating you, it's not inspiring you, but it's bringing up negative energy, then just simply unfollowing. That's also an option. So I love that you brought up social media and that we're talking about social media because it's so different. I was telling someone a couple of months ago that I'm so glad when I first started my career, there weren't a bunch of get ready with me's, days in the life. I'm like, my day in the life was not sexy. I had like an hour train ride. I had like a 20-minute walk. I'm like, and then I got in and then had to go to a meeting. I'm like, this is not a sexy day in the life. So I'm glad that I didn't have that to compare to when I was started out. But now that we have social media and professional platforms are becoming more like the traditional social media, how do you think that is shaping the professionals that are coming up? And even some of the seasoned ones who've been in their career for a while who might be feeling like, man, I didn't get those opportunities when I was that age, or I'm not even getting them now. Like, how is that shaping us as professionals and maybe even some of the habits that we are starting to exhibit as professionals?
Yeah, so I think that we have so much knowledge and information at our fingertips, and that's not a surprise to anyone. But because of that, there is this false sense of having all of the knowledge and the information at our fingertips. But we still have to dig a little bit deeper because social media is just, I don't even think it's not even one part of a Rubik's Cube. Going back to that analogy, it's like maybe aligned. But when it comes to the habit shaping, I think it has to come from when you have your initial feeling of whatever it is, the envy or the jealousy, because they are slightly different. It's really just seeing if you are uncomfortable, you don't have to shut it off immediately. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of like the trend that we're going in as our society. If there's something that I don't agree with, I'm going to shut it off. But what if we just for a little bit, and I'm not talking about an unhealthy amount, but just for a little bit, figure out why is this uncomfortable for us? And then we can shut it off after that point. This is a prime example. I study a lot of speakers. I'm comparing myself. You could say I'm comparing myself. I say I'm studying.
Yes.
I study a lot of speakers, and there was one speaker in particular that I just didn't care too much for. I was like, no. Mm-hmm. No, I could do that. Like, that's my initial, but then it's like, okay, LaPora, that's not good. Mm-hmm. What is that? And so then that habit is, all right, I'm uncomfortable with watching this person speak. Why is that? Mm-hmm. And then getting over to that next step. The habits are, I don't even know, because this is such a novel idea. I don't even know if the habit is something that people can yet develop. Aside from being aware, the habit of being aware of what's going on as it's happening, and then the habit of asking yourself why. Because I think that that's so vital and that's so important. And if we skip that step, going into another aspect of routine, I feel like we'll miss what I feel like is required for us to compare effectively.
So when people are self-aware, because that is what I'm hearing, that it all comes down to people being self-aware about what they can and can't handle when it comes to comparing. But like, once people get a handle on that, have you seen them exhibit different ways of reclaiming their voice and their influence? So are there some examples of some people who might have been negatively comparing themselves, and then they finally became self-aware, stepped into their confidence, and now they claim their voice? They know what kind of influence and impact they're making on their community. I'd love to hear some examples for folks who might be stuck in comparison or productive envy, so that they can know that there's hope on the other side. You can compare and it can be positive.
So an example of that, because this is still new, is that oftentimes we see athletes do it all the time. Ooh. So it doesn't necessarily result in someone speaking up more, but it results in the improvement of their actions. So I'll use this as an example. We take football teams. They study, even in boxing, right? They study the footage. Mm-hmm. They're not even just studying the footage of the moves that they made with somebody else. Well, let's go with boxing, because boxing is one-on-one. So it's not even just the moves that you make with how you swoop and how you jab and things like that, but it's also studying the person that you're getting ready to go up against. Now, in this case, when we're talking about athletes, it is a competitive. How can I beat that person? But if we widen the lens a little bit, it's also about how can I improve? Mm-hmm. Because we look at, we look at a lot of things as being extremes, like either you collaborate or you compete. Mm-hmm. But what if you can collaborate and compete? What if there is a duality to it? And in sports, maybe not necessarily, but in the workplace, yes, there is something that I call pacers. In all of the jobs that I've had, they've been called pacers. And a pacer is someone who is doing really, really good in the workplace. In my eyes, I'm just like, wow, that person, they got it going on. Like, I don't know how in the world they complete those projects. And so what I started doing at that point was I started figuring out what are ways that I can collaborate with this person. Because I don't want to just see your outcome. I want to know what it takes. And when I collaborate, I'm not collaborating to sabotage them. I'm not collaborating to bring them down. I actually want to see them succeed, because that tells me what it takes to succeed. And if I am collaborating in order to just compete and bring them down, I won't see that.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's something that people can start recognizing, is that they can work together. So if you see someone that's doing really good in the workplace, have a conversation with them. See if there's an opportunity for you to contribute to their success, because now not only are they going to still be, you're collaborating and you're helping them move forward, but you also get a little bit of a behind the scenes as to what it takes for someone in that type of position in order to be able to exceed and excel.
Yeah, I think it just helps some people crush some toxic work environment. Yeah, let's collaborate. Let's not bring people down. So I love that you brought that up. If you could go back and talk to your younger self during a low point or a season where you felt like you were behind or overlooked, what would you say? Because there is someone out there who is sitting in that right now.
Oh gosh, I really don't want to go back to that time.
I know.
But I'll go there just for a little bit.
For a little bit.
What I would say is that, and this kind of goes into this saying, I don't remember who said it. I'm really good about remembering what somebody said, but not remembering who said it. I got to work on that. But one of the things I would say is that just because a path is not as commonly taken, it doesn't mean that it's the wrong path. And as it comes to, being able to be recognized and demonstrate value and being heard, many times, if we take that path that's less traveled, that is how we can be seen, we can be heard. When we follow the path that other people are following, it's hard for people to see us because we are behind someone else and we're doing everything the person in front of us is doing. That's what we're doing. But if we say, this isn't working for me, I want to go here. Well, now we've just opened it up where we can be seen and we can be heard because we're doing something that's different instead of following in the exact path. It's kind of like that thing where, you got like a whole bunch of people. If everyone is moving at the exact same time, you're not going to see anyone behind you. But if you just change it just a little bit, some slight tweaks where it is true to you and authentic to you, people will see that because you're not a replicated version of someone else. You are your own self. And that's what I would tell myself. Be your own self. It feels weird and it feels uncomfortable, but you have to be your own self. Otherwise, people will not see you. They will see someone else and they will forget who you are. Because I used to get overlooked a lot. But as soon as I started owning who I was, it was like night and day. Like, I'm like, my name?
Yeah.
Amazing. It was amazing. Yeah.
I love that. What made you do that switch in your mind to start showing up as yourself and not following someone else's path or blueprint?
Well, the interesting thing is that I was already like doing things at work that was very impactful, but I still didn't feel seen. It wasn't honestly until I used to wear wigs because I have like alopecia areata. So it comes and goes where I'll get like bald patches on my scalp. And I decided that I was going to stop wearing the wigs. And that was when because I stopped wearing the wigs, I started dressing differently. Dressing how I felt made me look the most powerful, how I felt the most powerful. And that was when that small switch changed everything. I was wearing wigs back in high school. So all of that time, I was trying to be what I thought being powerful looked like, what I thought it represented. I was trying to dress the part, look the part. But when I literally took the wig off, it took off a mental wig that I had on myself. And I think we all have our own wigs where if I can just cover up, if I can just fit in, then I'll stand out. But you can't. You have to choose.
I love that piece about you have to choose. It's like definite. You have to choose. Eventually, you'll have to choose. I think we all eventually choose. I don't think it's ever too late. Thank you for sharing that. I do love to talk about myths a little bit. So if there is one myth that you feel people should unlearn.
Oh gosh, that one's hard because I feel like I'm slowly unlearning everything. So I don't even remember what half of these myths are because I just be like,
Okay. Well, maybe what's something that you recently unlearned about success and growth? Maybe that's a better way to put it.
What I've learned is that for every action that you take in order to be successful, there are about what feels like 100 follow-up actions in order for that to be the final step. So for instance, speaking engagements, like a speaking engagement isn't the final step. There are so many steps that get you to that point. And then there are so many steps that you have to follow after in order for it to be a complete success. The other part as well is that I've learned that for most successful people that I've been studying and looking at closely, it takes on average about 10 years from the day that they intentionally decide that this is what they're going to do and they're consistently working. It takes about 10 years for them to reach this point where it's success that is defined by multiple people, where people start wanting to give them time, where people are just like, oh my gosh, that person is amazing, where that person who has set that goal is just like, yes, I am where I want to be. This is where I wanted to be 10 years ago. It typically takes around 10 years.
So are you a believer of the 10,000 hour rule?
Yeah.
Not
that I'm a disbeliever.
Yes.
I don't know if there's a number to it. I know I said 10 years, but that's just because as I start to study people and I look at where they started and then when they started to get really popular or when their ideas started to spread, it's usually around that 10-year mark. But it could be less, it could be more, because there's some other things that go into that I don't have time to share as far as with like, I have this theory of investments, times, and sacrifice. And there's this formula that each person has to choose what formula is going to work best over those 10 years. So that's another time.
I'm glad you brought that up. I know we're getting juicy. I'm glad you brought that up because I think in frameworks a lot. I use this framework example for side hustles, but I think it can carry over to any point of your life. And it does have a similar vibe to what you were saying. Do you have the time to do the thing that you want to do?
Yeah.
Are you passionate? Are you curious? Are you learning? Do you have the money to make the investment?
Yes.
It seems really basic, but when you sit down and think about it and you create like a mental check, you're like, oh, don't have the money. Maybe now's not time to invest, or maybe I invest in something smaller that's similar. So I see where you're going. And now I feel like we have to have like an extended session about frameworks around building up. Like, I honestly, it's probably like your purpose work, but that scares a lot of people. So I try not to use the word purpose work a lot, and I'll say something like impact. But yeah, I do think the where you come from, the environment that you're in, and then those external and internal investments that you make all goes into one big ball.
Yes.
That is what we see after 10 years or maybe more than a decade. But yeah, I'm with you. I believe it.
Say, yeah. And I'll mention this because this does kind of tie into comparison as well. And this is something also that I've learned recently. So there used to be this thing as far as like, how much time do we have in a day? Like everyone has the same amount of time in the day. But then I came across an article and they were like, well, Beyonce doesn't have the same amount of hours in a day that somebody else has, because I can almost guarantee you there is somebody that is taking care of her emails. There is somebody that is taking care of the phone calls. There is somebody that is taking care of the food. There is somebody that is taking care of the cleaning. So technically she has about 500 hours in a day. And that's because she's getting all of those things done that one person doing all of those jobs could only get done within a more finite amount of time. And so when we think about going back to the comparison, as I just sum everything up, that's why it's so important to look beyond that, because you wonder, how can one person do all of these things and all of these accomplishments? We don't know what other resources they have.
Yep.
And unless we know that, there's no potential way for us to be like, yes, I want to be like this person, because you don't know the sacrifices that person took to get there. And you don't know the investment, and you don't know what other additional help that they have.
I love that, because I go back to some of just like the LinkedIn creators and influencers we see. Some of them have been talking about them going through hiring processes. They've been revealing and dropping the people who've been doing their video editing and who's been writing their scripts. And I'm like, breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
Please share when you have help so that people aren't pulling their hair out trying to keep up with the content funnels and other things that they see online. So I love
Yeah.
that you brought that up. And I love that people are not gatekeeping as much as they used to. I'm going to close this out. I'll leave it with one final question so that people can take something with them. Do you have a favorite prompt or activity from one of your workshops or even practice that you do for yourself that helps you reconnect with your potential and your worth and your value?
Yes, I think the activity that I shared earlier, because it's about reviving your self-worth, because self-worth isn't dependent on any external contingencies or the actions that we do. It is contingent upon us and how we view ourselves.
Yeah.
And that activity, the feedback that I've gotten when people do that is that they start to recognize that regardless of what job title they have, regardless of where they are in an organizational structure, they do have value.
Yeah.
And so that's just something that I try to practice, and other people, they say that they practice that in order to just remind themselves as needed.
I love it. All right. We'll leave people with that. If you missed that activity, scroll back and do the activity. But this was lovely. Thank you so much for your time. I now
Thank
know
you.
what healthy comparison is versus negative comparison in the workplace online. And I know the folks watching took some gems from this as well. But thank you so much for your time. We'll do this again.
Thank you.
If today's conversation resonated, take a moment to pause before scrolling to the next thing. Sit with what comparison is trying to teach you, not about someone else, but about yourself. Leave a comment with what stood out, rate the episode, and if you're listening on audio, a quick review helps more people find these conversations. And finally, don't forget to drop your dream in the dream database, especially if comparison has been whispering that you're behind. You're not, you're just on your own timeline. Now, go out and thrive on your own terms.